like
because that's why I always try to say, sorry to cut you off. That's why I always try to tell you, like, kill the reactionary part of your brain. Like, an example I can give you is Cenk. An example I can give you is Kasparian. Like, when you find yourself, when you find yourself susceptible to right-wing framing on certain issues without thinking clearly through them, there is like, it's almost like a muscle. You're training yourself into basically subscribing to certain ideals or certain ideas or certain talking points without engaging in critical thinking. It might start with you maybe having a traumatic experience with like a homeless person or something. Like with Cenk, he saw like a homeless person and then he was like, that's it, I'm done, right? And then he started being like, no, we got to do something about this crime stuff. And then all of a sudden, even if you are a very progressive person, even if you've been a champion of progressive values for 15 plus years, 20 years at this point, you find yourself saying things like Gavin Newsom is releasing 75,000 prisoners in the state of California when that is obviously not the reality.
Or I want to have Rick Caruso be the mayor of Los Angeles instead of Karen Bass. Anna, she's lashing out. She's salty. She's been coming after Hasan Piker. She, can't resist. And now it looks like Hasan is striking back. It looks like he's finally willing to address the fact that, the network founded by his own uncle has been throwing a little dirt on his name. Do you want to take a look at this, Gavin? Do you have any thoughts before we get into it?
Yeah, let's take a look. Super excited to see Hasan kind of get into this a bit. Obviously, like you said, Zach, Anna's brought him up a couple times, all in a very jealous context.
Having said that, however, I'm sure that the DEI stuff will continue because I don't think a lot of people.
The DEI's die will continue until morale improves.
I don't think that people understand that like that is the vector of radicalization that sparks your journey. That is the start of this kind of stuff.
It is like
because that's why I always try to say. Sorry to cut you off. That's why I always try to tell you, like, kill the reactionary part of your brain. Like. An example I can give you is Cenk. An example I can give you is Kasparian. Like, when you find yourself, susceptible to right-wing framing on certain issues without thinking clearly through them, there is like, it's almost like a muscle. You're training yourself into basically subscribing to certain ideals or certain ideas or certain talking points without engaging in critical thinking. And it can be one vector of radicalization. It can be one thing, right? And that slowly but surely starts changing the way that you view everything, okay? It's slowly but...
And I think that's a great point. And we'll come back to the rest of the video in a second, Gavin. But I think that's a very charitable and honest way of addressing what's happening to his own uncle and his uncle's co-host, right? This is like Hasan... I imagine still has a pretty good relationship with Cenk, right? Like, that's his uncle. Like, if my dad was out here doing a podcast, or God forbid, my uncle was out here doing a podcast, I'd be talking about how they were saying the most unhinged shit you've ever heard in your entire life. And we would still eat Thanksgiving dinner together, right? So I imagine it's a similar thing with Cenk and Hasan. But he also is coming at this from a more charitable perspective, right? Like, if again, to use the example of if it were your own family, you'd be like, they're nice people. They've been led astray. This is how that kind of brainwashing, this is how the red pilling begins. This is how you watch yourself become the reactionary that you once lampooned, right? We played that clip from the Michael Brooks show that ruffled some feathers, but we both thought it was a pretty illustrative example of Anna's evolution, where she lampoons Dave Rubin, a person who also got their career start at the Young Turks network, and talks about how they've just turned themselves into a reactionary, an antagonist of the left. That's exactly what we've seen from Anna Kasparian, and that's why she highlights issues like gang violence. That's why she highlights issues like homelessness. That's why she highlights issues like gender equity and the LGBTQ community, right? Because those are red meat to right-wingers, and they're also reactionary content, right? It's not impacting your life that this person is homeless. It's impacting their life for sure. And you should care about that as a humanitarian. You should care about that as an empath, as somebody who wants to see your fellow humans succeed, right? That's supposed to be innate in all of us, particularly leftists, right? But instead, you start to find them repulsive. You find them disgusting. You draw resentment or fear or disgust or whatever these kinds of emotions are from them. And I think that it's really excellent advice from Hasan Piker to be like, just kill that part of your brain off. Whenever you can tell you're being reactionary, whenever you can tell it's your lizard brain and not your heart that's telling you what to do, maybe you should check that. And when you forget to do that, you slowly unravel and you slowly start to secede your principles to more nefarious right-wing reactionary outlooks.
Yeah, and specifically, I think it's so correct to identify what's happened with Anna as straight up reactionary. In fact, it seems like she can't even talk about her own political transition without basically admitting that yeah, this is all in reaction to the way other people online have talked about me and the way that lefties on Twitter act and stuff like that. It's one thing to have a genuine political transition. Like, you know, obviously we're on the left, we're pacifists, neither of us own guns, but like say one of us did get mugged or something, I could see that triggering change in our literal the way our brains work, right? Sometimes that happens, and then, you know, maybe you're like, I want to own a gun now. Previously I didn't, but now I do because I'm traumatized and I want to feel like I can protect myself when I go outside. Obviously that's not something that's happened to me, but I'm just saying I can understand it happening. But what I can understand happening is like changing your position on gun ownership because of like the way people on Twitter are talking about the subject matter or something to that regard. And it seems like that's really what's happened with Anna. I know that she's talked about the instance she experienced with the homeless man, but it seems like really what has triggered her pivot isn't even that, but the way people have talked about her commentary online and the way that people on Twitter and social media have you know, like made fun of her and stuff and been unfair to her. It's like she can't discuss her political transition without talking about it in that context. And again, that's the context of it being a reactionary position.
Surely starts helping you come to conclusions on every other issue. It might start with like the crime panic. It might start with you maybe having a traumatic experience with like a homeless person or something. Like with Cenk, he saw like a homeless person and then he was like, that's it, I'm done, right? And then he started being like, no, we got to do something about this crime stuff. And then all of a sudden, even if you are a very progressive person, even if you've been a champion of progressive values for 15 plus years, 20 years at this point, you find yourself saying things like Gavin Newsom is releasing 75,000 prisoners in the state of California when that is obviously not the reality.
Or I want to have Rick Caruso be the mayor of Los Angeles instead of Karen Bass.
Reality, without like examining that statement whatsoever. And then slowly but surely, it actually seeps into other things that you might have believed in the past that you no longer are believing and that you are more primed and more susceptible to right-wing framing on, whether it's like trans stuff or this or that, like, and it slowly takes over your consciousness and it slowly but surely radicalizes you.
And it makes you, I mean, like, to me, like that radicalization, a huge part of it is because what's changing is not just like, oh, my opinion on the content of this specific issue, but it's the structure of your thought. It's the idea of, you know, it's like the cynicism and the expectation that like, oh, well, all people who are homeless and stuff, like they want to steal stuff and they're, you know, it's consequences of choices. And if you've now, you know, accepted that premise, if you've granted that, then you'll start like thinking about that same, you know, you'll like that same idea, like the same set of assumptions that you'll bring to that set of, you know, that situation will be what you bring to everything from, you know, trans people in sports and how that's just about people wanting to, you know, outcompete biological females or whatever, you know, something gross like that.
Yeah.
Like it's a very,
you will always, in the intersectionality of bigotry and the intersectionality of you know, oppression, there is always going to be something that kind of fits the bill for you. Okay. And the right very clearly and very deliberately go back to the drawing board regularly. I'll give you the issue of trans panic stuff in the United States of America, right? When they did the bathroom bill in North Carolina, everyone was like, that's weird and gross. What the f-? And businesses were like, we're pulling out of North Carolina. Donald Trump was pro-trans at the time in 2016. He said, Caitlyn Jenner can take or piss in whichever bathroom she wants to, right? Now, that seems like a lifetime ago. That was only 8 years ago. And now, if you look at the right-wing framing on this issue, it's dramatically different.
And one of the things I think we've done a decent job, not to pat ourselves on the back too hard, is highlight how both progressives who want to pivot to the right or pivot to the enlightened center or the unaligned position, right, which is basically just the right but without all of the direct hateful language. They're more interested in laundering the culture war. Basically you'll go from listening to the Young Turks to listening to the new Anna unalignment to listening to Dave Rubin, and now you're a full-on right winger. This is how the pipeline works. I think that it's important to point out that it's also really unpopular from an electoral standpoint, right? So while it gets a bunch of clicks online and it's a good barometer for who is willing to debase themselves and who is willing to, subjugate and persecute another community and step on them for their own benefit in the media world and for their own benefit in the culture world, it's actually not popular with average everyday Americans, right? We saw this a lot in 2022 when everybody was anticipating a red wave, but we didn't get one, thank God, because they staked everything on we want a national abortion ban and we hate trans kids.
Yep. Also, shout out to you, Benjamin, coming in with a spicy theory. Benjamin says, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Anna is diagnosed with some early onset neurodegenerative condition, seen some small signs here and there, but then again, it could always just be the anti-woke mind virus. I think you're joking, Benjamin, but I do think it's kind of funny that you bring this up because we have seen several cases in somewhat recent memory of people shifting to the right for exactly the reason that you mentioned. I actually do think a significant amount of people that turn into crazy right-wing anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists, it is because of mental illness or some sort of neurodegenerative condition. Like we talked about Roseanne Barr, we've talked about Kanye West. Sometimes, that kind of stuff will literally make you more vulnerable to these ideas and specifically to conspiratorial rabbit holes. So obviously, I don't think that's probably the case with Anna, but I mean, with some people, yeah, it literally is as simple as mental illness or like addiction issues. Obviously, you have like Elon Musk and Kanye West have both made outrageous right-wing pivots in the last 5 years. A lot of people also think they're mentally ill. A lot of people think they're addicted to ketamine or nitrous oxide, stuff like that.
What happened in that time frame? Republican groups like, Family Values Seminar or whatever, like all these right-wing Christian nationalist groups, think tanks, looked at that situation and saw that that was not a helpful way to invoke trans panic, to create this idea that trans people were this nefarious force that was destroying society. So they went back to the drawing board and they tested out and focus grouped different forms of messaging. And they inevitably landed on something that was very successful. When you say trans people are files or whatever, that is not a successful method to get normal people on board. Okay.
As illustrated in 2022 specifically.
Yeah.
That's not a successful method to get normal people on board with your cause. When you, however, turn around and say trans people are indecently trying to destroy fairness in sports, a concept that Americans understand is the only real meritocracy in the United States of America, sports, when trans people are actually, transing themselves specifically to win competitions. It sounds silly because it actually is silly, but that is a tested focus group message that actually stuck. And that's why they kept harping on it over and over.
Also, shout out to you once again, Benjamin, spilling a little bit more tea. LMFAO. She was sending me the most wild DMs after criticizing her Substack. Shake my head. I just can't believe it's grifting. Ooh, spicy tea. Thank you, Benjamin, for spilling that. Interesting. So she's been in your DMs. She's been messaging you directly based on your criticism of her Substack. That's absolutely insane. Obviously, I won't ask you to share those DMs with us. I would never ask you to do something so immoral, of course, but that is interesting, bro. If she's literally getting in the DMs of people like yourself over some criticism, I mean, that's crazy, bro. It's one thing to get triggered about another high profile content creator criticizing you, but I mean, you're not even a content creator, Benjamin. You're not even a political commentator. You're whatever you want to call yourself. You know what I'm saying? That's absolutely wild. That's absolutely wild. Holy shit. Yeah, maybe she is literally mentally ill. Maybe she needs help.